Welcome to another episode of Second Nature Podcast. Thank you for joining us. Today we have a special guest, Svend Wiele. He is a friend, skills coach, coach mentor, personal life coach, and also another guy that loves talking about mental health and has had some of his own struggles in the past. And we're just going to explore some topics today. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here, Sven.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we've been chatting a lot in the last couple or 2 months or so, and a topic that seems to come up quite often is the idea of having that self-worth.
Mhm.
And I always thought that could be a great topic for us to explore today.
Definitely.
I know you grew up in East Berlin and had a very different upbringing from a lot of us Canadians over here. And I thought that could be a place where we could start. And maybe if we go right into that self worth, or if we just start with a little bit of your childhood and then go
Yeah.
from there.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks again for having me. Yeah. When it comes to self-worth, I think we all have different definition of what that means and how we maybe embrace self-worth or not, or how we have maybe learned from others what self-worth is. But me growing up in East Berlin, I was 8 years old when the wall came down. There wasn't a lot when it comes to food and materialistic things. So when it comes to self-worth, how you may share self-worth in the family, it was usually through words or physical touch, which is maybe a bit different than these days when things can be about self-worth when it comes to, I'm going to buy a watch this week and I'll buy another watch next week because it makes me feel worth something. So that was my upbringing. Self-worth was definitely a component of my life that I didn't explore until I had to go through the anxiety and depression. That's when I had to really explore within that what self-worth and self-love is. Um, I find prior to that, me growing up in East Berlin, you were always kind of in survival mode of, what's the next week like? What's the next month like? Based on my parents losing jobs, having jobs. Sometimes you go to a grocery store and come back with no food. Of course, then when the wall came down, things changed a little bit. I was still pretty young. I was never living in adulthood in East Berlin, which probably wasn't as severe for me as it may have been for my parents. My parents definitely lived a completely different environment when it came to their own self-worth. And I think that's another component that who are our teachers. And I think when it comes to my family, my dad's self-worth and his meaning of that was definitely very different than my mom's. And I think you're usually holding on at that point more to the things that are harder for you and that are more negative, and you focus on that compared to looking at, well, there's one person that gives you a feel of self-worth and self-love and the other one isn't. Um, But at the end of the day, everyone is trying their best. And that's kind of what I learned through my parents, even if maybe there was abuse or there was negativity or there was hard times of just really having nothing. Um, you had to keep going. So when I ended up moving to Canada, I never really experienced self-worth really because I was always attached to a sport. I played hockey my whole life. I was a pretty good hockey player. Growing up in Berlin, always made top teams, always was a captain, always was a quiet leader in some ways. But I didn't look at that as self-worth or self-appreciation. I more looked at that as, well, you got to do this. You are in the sport. You got to show up and you got to score goals or make assists or come to practice and work hard. But I didn't connect that to self-worth. That's a task at hand that I have to fulfill. When I ended up going through, moving to Canada, going through divorce, now you're like, well, what am I worth? Now I don't have the sport that I used to play professionally. And I don't have a partner that reflects worth back to me. Who am I? And what am I representing? And I think that's when it, for the first time, hit me pretty hard with depression, anxiety. Um, but at that point, I was like, I'm just sad. How do you deal with sad days? Well, you just maybe go to bed early and start on another day. Um, so then things kept piling up. But it's the biggest thing of self-worth that I learned was, I think when I was going through my deepest depression, when I was suicidal, um, I think the self-worth component that ended up coming is you had to make a choice. Do I want to let others down that love me, or do I want to continue living by loving myself? And that's kind of how I ended up doing it. I was like, I got a choice here. I can leave this planet, or I can live the life I deserve to live through loving myself, which in some ways, people that were close to me were showing me every day. But because you're in such a bad mindset and everything is so gray and dark every day, you sometimes don't embrace the people that love you until you ask yourself the question, well, do you want to live or do you want to just leave? And that's kind of when it hit rock bottom for me to understand what self-worth and self-love really means. And then I chose self-love and self-worth and giving myself the attention and the words of affirmation, or the kindness that I deserve, that I think I've always given to others, but it was always easier to give it to others than give it to myself. But I had to hit rock bottom to understand that I deserve to give it to myself every single day. And that would be kind of what's just popping up in my head based on the topic.
Well, that was that was a great overview of a lot of things we can chat about here. Um, and I know a lot of people are glad that you chose to continue on because you make a good impact in a lot of people's lives and through coaching and whatever it is, just being you. So we've talked too a lot about attaching ourselves to something else, right? Like we both were hockey players and we've been chatting in a group of other athletes, and it's kind of like attaching us to our sport and kind of putting ourselves all in on that. And that's who we are. I'm a hockey player. I'm a figure skater. I'm whatever. Right. Is there anything you could kind of talk more on with being able to continue to do your sport, but also being able to understand that you're still a person and you still have other things that can go on in your life and you can do and kind of be successful in the sport, but also make sure that you're taking care of yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a few different angles that this could be going. I find w- when we grow up, we are as good as the next person beside us, or we have to be better than them. And I think comparisons in sport are mostly being handled in a negative environment compared to in a positive reaffirmation environment of, look, what can we take out of this scenario and implement it within our own abilities, compared to why can't we all be like this person, or why can't we all be doing it like this scenario? Well, we need to first know who we are ourselves, I find, to understand what our foundation is. And if I understand who I am, now I can see, okay, these are my strengths and weaknesses. So now if I'm looking at someone else, how they may be, it may be easier to dissect. Okay, I can add this, but I may not be able to add this component to me because I don't have the fundamental strength or the coordination or the mindset as someone else may have. That's why we're all so special, because we're all very different and we all handle things very different on a daily basis. The comparison component, I find, was always brought up in a negative way, but it could be turned around in a positive when we look at what can be added to us in our foundation that we already have. I find any sport is competitive, and that's just the reality with sports, but we can't lose ourselves in the sport. And I find a lot of times we lose ourselves because we don't have our own foundation and we have a lack of a foundation. And how can I then compare myself to someone else if I don't even know who I am? And that was, I think, one of the biggest things for me was with sports. What have I gained out of everything I've ever done? And what has it given me? That is my foundation for me moving on into now giving other athletes, if that's on the ice or if it comes to life coaching. Listening was one of the biggest things, is listening to yourself and who you are becoming and what you have learned, but also listen to others, what they're truly saying to you compared to making blank assumptions about anything that isn't maybe worth my while, because it doesn't really give me growth. And if it doesn't give me growth, then it may not be something to put energy towards compared to looking for the growth aspect and looking at life as a teaching tool. Anything in life, if that is a scenario or a person, they usually teach us something. We choose to look at that compared to, oh, why is that happening to me, or poor me, and I'm going to victimizing. That usually doesn't give me any productivity, doesn't give me anything tangible. It actually makes me feel stagnant and stationary and still. And there's no growth in that.
Yeah, exactly. You get stuck. And I know for myself, it was a lot of kind of sports was something I was good at, but there were other things in my life that I did, and like playing guitar, drawing, like artistic things that I kind of, the more serious hockey got, the more I kind of pushed those things out of the way. And like it even happened in sport. Like I played lacrosse and I played hockey. I was actually a way better lacrosse player than I was a hockey player. And I actually, now thinking about it, loved lacrosse, but there was a more positive avenue to go down in hockey. So I remember kind of playing lacrosse, playing hockey, playing lacrosse, playing hockey. And then once I got listed by a WHL team and I had like a goal, like, yeah, one day I want to play in the WHL. Then that summer I'm going, or at the end of that summer, I'm going to go to a WHL camp. Okay, well, maybe I should start training in like hockey specific. So I remember that exact summer. It was the last time I played lacrosse, but it was also the first time I started the hockey training. And that lacrosse season was a disaster. Like I was, I wasn't able to go to all the practices. So then, granted, I wasn't playing as much of the games because absolutely, if I can't make the commitment to come to the practices, then I shouldn't be able to play in the games. But at that moment in time, I didn't understand it, and I was just angry. Like, I'd get on the floor and I would just lose it. And then so maybe that was something inside of me kinda like, "Hey, man, what are you doing? Like, you're pushing away this thing that you love in order to go do this other thing that, yeah, you're also good at, but it may not be the right path for you." But it's also like, "Oh, you can go play in the WHL, you can earn a scholarship, who knows?" There's At the end of the day, you could be professional, like all that kind of stuff. So I know that's something that I, over time, and it led me into a lot of my mental health issues and addiction issues, was pushing all those things aside and just becoming a hockey player, I
Yeah.
think. And I think that created a void that I stopped doing all those other things. And the easiest thing to make me feel better, escape, maybe forget about those other things was to turn to alcohol
Yeah.
and use it as a tool, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm hearing there is when I think about the sport that I played, and like you just kind of mentioned, it was outcome driven. Well, if I go in this direction, I'll have more positive paths to go to towards financial needs or schooling or scholarships, things like that. I think with me growing up in East Berlin and not having a lot and seeing like my parents going through different jobs and stuff like that and not having money, I maybe for myself I had that feel, well, if I make the top league, um, in hockey in Germany, I'll be comfortable financially, but I also can be, proud of what I have achieved
Mhm.
compared to, uh, is an achievement an end result, or is an achievement what we're living on a daily basis, that we actually enjoy what we do? And sometimes with enjoying what we do, there will be hard days too, when you go through hardships and things that need to be overcome. But I find after the fact, it was very, well, you got to make the national team, and you got to play at this, and you got to be the top guy there. And you always lived in the future, and the living in the moment component, which you and I have talked about a lot and recently. The living of the moment component is completely getting lost because everything is outcome driven. If there isn't, this one practice isn't good, or this one game isn't good at a U12 team or U13 team, oh, that may impact me when I'm a pro, or if I even make it to be a pro. That is not realistic. And with me living in the hockey world still, I see that on a weekly basis how kids, they're so focused on what the outcome could be that they completely forget about task at hand. I love the sport. Let's enjoy what I'm doing. If I am more relaxed, I'll probably have a healthier outcome. And I actually maybe relax in the right environment to get more skill, or get more game time, or get more, I don't know, uh, see the ice better instead of being tunnel viewed because I'm stressed out. I think there's definitely an unhealthy environment out there. And on the flip side, I needed that environment to become who I am today. So I'm not holding any grudges against it. It's just a perspective change. And the perspective change, in my opinion, isn't being taught a lot of times. There's only one way, and that is you make it or you don't. But there's different layers to it, because making it could be playing as a Canadian. Making it could be, you play Western Hockey League, or you get a scholarship, or you play junior A. You are making it to a certain level others didn't. Or it may mean that you play in Europe instead of playing in the American Hockey League or the NHL. There's a lot of options out there of what making it means depending on our own abilities and skill, but they aren't being addressed. And I could see that being very heavy on a lot of athletes. It was definitely heavy on me because you're always in a future looking environment, and it was suffocating. And I think if you're living in a suffocating environment every day, how are you going to be free to achieve certain goals? You achieve them, but then you never celebrate because there's a next goal already next week coming. So that's kind of what I'm hearing from
Yeah.
what you just mentioned.
And like in a perspective and focusing on the outcome, it I mean, with the materialized world and all that, it has to be the big thing, right? We don't really perceive it as, hey, now I can look at it and I'm like, the outcome of my hockey career is that I've made some of the best friends in my life, right? And growing up and going through all that, like those are the guys I still talk to. And then even into junior, there's a couple more guys that you keep in touch with and all that. And that's kind of that living in the moment aspect, but also that's also an outcome, right? Like it's not financially driven. It's just more in kind of that happiness quote of creating a community of people that you enjoy to be around and all that kind of stuff. And that was the perspective that I had to come to realize when I had a bunch of resentment and all that towards screwing up playing hockey, putting all that time in, and then ending up just not being in it anymore, right? Um, I know one thing we talked about too was kind of that overdoing of the skills and the practices and that kind of stuff. And this might be a good thing for parents to hear. I remember you talking about how one family wanted you to do like 3 days in a row of skill sessions. And you were like, well, how about we do one this week and then one next week and you can take what it is. And it's just like, well, no, we want back to back to back. And
Mm.
then kind of, if you don't want to do it, we can go find somebody else. And like just that overcommitment to thinking that you need to do this now when you're 10, 11, 12 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's two views or a few views on that. Is this parent driven? Is this parents' dreams? Are they living their dreams through their kid? But if I'm living my own dreams through someone else and I keep readjusting that person to live my dream, how much are they actually enjoying what they're doing and living their own dream? They don't have a chance to do that. And I find when it comes to the hockey world, I am going to be honest about you don't have to hire me for 3 days in a row. I'd rather do one good one, give you homework. You may rent ice on your own with another buddy. So you break out cost or whatever that may be, and you work on repetition there so that when you see me in a week later or 2 weeks later, whatever that may be, now you actually have improved and we can touch on the next component. Because I'm trying to also look at it as financial cost with economy these days. Things aren't as cheap as they could be, as they used to be. I also find that parents don't look at the holistic component of mentally, is my kid engaged in this or is it me that's engaged in this? How is my kid doing physically? Are they actually fit to do these things?
Yeah.
Or are they, do they have tight hips? Are they not strong on their core and hips? How is their ankle flexion? How low do they can go? All those things are components where I'm finding they're not being looked at. Everything has to be fixed on the ice, but there's a lot of components that actually have to be handled in combination with off ice and mental and nutrition and rest. And I find rest is one of the biggest things that's being neglected. More isn't always better, but because I find there's a lot of kids on the ice or that they're just on the ice because they're signed up, but they're not really on the ice showing up. And I
Mhm.
find now we work on bad habits. We work on more over stick handling. We don't need to more over stick handle. We need to see the ice as we move our feet and stick handle less. But if I'm not mentally and physically there, I can't embrace the feedback that's being passed on because I'm
Mhm.
just on a robotic, automatic motion, just going through practices. But I still find that even the kids that do go through that, they're supposed to learn something out of these things. And kind of like we had to learn out of our hockey experiences, our life experience, they always taught us something. If that means learn how to speak up, learn how to take care of ourselves, learn how to say no, learn how to take care, not just for today, but how am I looking after myself for the next season or for a year from now? And looking more at the big picture too. There's so much learning in there that you almost don't want to make it a personal component to the families. It's something they have to figure out internally. Just kind of how I had to learn through the dynamics within my family, who I thought I was and who I believed I was through false beliefs. And I think false beliefs is huge until I realized, well, I like these beliefs better about myself because they're actually putting me in a healthy mindset. But I had to learn that through failure or negativity to overcome that. So I'm really not holding any grudges when it comes to myself or when I have parents around me. I just try and educate and say, hey, um, there's these options. If that means being more physical in the gym or working on the mental component in combination to nutrition and rest, there's more out there. I educate and then it's up to them. And if they choose
Right.
to go somewhere else, then so be it. But I've done my part.
Right. Right. And it all comes back to that self-worth too, is if those kids can't learn how to say no or it's too much and they're kind of pressured into all this stuff, it might be like, okay, well, this is who I am. Right. And it might be forced upon them instead of chosen for themselves. So
Yeah.
that's something that I, having coached for a few years myself, is s- kind of a worrisome thing because I know kind of what me attaching my self-worth to hockey was, and then not really taking it or taking it for granted while I was in it and not learning that I did like it kind of until afterwards. and that sent me into some dark places. So that's kind of a fear I have, especially for these young kids who are going through hockey, where it's every single day, all year long. We talked last night about Christmas camps in between Christmas and New Year's. Like
Mhm.
you said, how many Christmases do you get?
Mhm.
Not as many as the other 362 days a year that you're playing hockey, right? And the worry is that these kids are going to go along and sure, they might learn some good lessons, but they also might get to the end of the road and just be like, wow, I gave all my time, my entire life was to that. And now I'm done and I got to go to school and become an accountant or like
Mhm.
something like that. Is
Yeah.
there is there anything you see? Do you see kind of the same thing or
I think because I heard the word fear. For
yeah,
me, I can't emotionally attach myself to other people's life circumstances because it's not for me to fix.
right?
And if I don't want to give the same feel or vibration, then I should go into the opposite, which is love. So if I'm
Mhm,
going through love and educate what it could be and what the options are, now it's their choice to go and choose the direction they're choosing. And I think
right.
that's for me the healthier way to go is if I now fear for them and now I speak through fear to them, I'm actually going down that same path as what they're already living every day. Compared to, well, let's turn that around. Let's be in education, in an educational environment, educate them on what other options there are and go through love. And then they choose, do I want to stay with that person and their vibration, or do I want to choose another person that may have a different vibration, a different feel, different thought? And that's okay. I, um, I used to take things very direct and emotional because I felt for these people. But
Mhm,
again, that never worked for me. And I think um, when we go from a perspective of clarity and education and teaching and learning, then we're actually finding a healthier ground to stand on. And I also find maybe in the past when maybe my pro career could have gone completely different. Instead of doing 4 years, I maybe could have done more, but it is
mhm,
okay that it is the way it went. And I'm accepting it completely because it directed me onto the path or it kept me going on the path that I was supposed to live. And the what ifs and the what could have been different and why did I do
yeah,
this? I think after the fact, it's never healthy. And that's kind of how I'm treating the same thing when I talk to parents. I give them my authentic myself, my honest opinion. And I always say I live on this, but I
mhm,
also understand that there's a bigger spectrum than just the on ice component. A swimmer doesn't just swim. They do a lot of dry land stuff. They may work on rotating their shoulders at a different level than we do in hockey, for example, because of the way they're swimming. There's a strength component, a flexibility component, a body control component that is being done outside the water.
mhm,
And I think we need to look at that in any sport. That's why it's a holistic viewpoint instead of a one-dimensional. Let's just fix everything on the ice. Well, the athlete needs to be an athlete in general first before the athlete chooses to play the sport of hockey. And that's kind
right,
of what I find I'm pushing towards or trying to support others with.
right. And you've gone through some of that stuff, and that's how you're able to show up for them, right? Is you're able to come through with that presence of love and education and all that kind of stuff. And this is another thing that I wanted to talk about is understanding that other people have gone through their own stuff. And if they come to your, whether this is a parent or a coach or whatever, it's understanding that most of the time it's not directed at you, right? If it's a negative thing or whatever, and we have that victim mentality, but what it is if you come with love, they might be coming with something else because of their background, and understanding that it's not your fault that that's what they've gone through, or that's what
Yeah.
they come with. So is there can you speak on that too? Because I know you've got some good insight in that kind of presence.
Yeah, I find if it, I don't know, when I went through counseling, psychology, and all that stuff through my depression, and I did a lot of hours with professionals where they always detached myself from anything else. So let's say you would go see a psychologist and you talk bad about someone, what someone did to you. I can't, the psychologist can't control that other person. And what that other person did to me, my perception of what I
Mhm.
receive from that person, that's what I'm struggling with. I'm
Yep.
struggling with who I think I am, with what that person may have said to me. If I choose to hold on to that, well, let's walk through that. And that's kind of the component that I'm trying to work with. If that is on a daily basis in my relationship with friends, or in a professional environment, if someone says something to you, how am I reacting to it? And that is my
Mhm.
control. What the person said to me, it could be not even face me, or it could really trigger me in a positive or negative way, because we could be triggered in different directions. But that's kind of what I'm trying to look at when it comes to anyone that's coming in my life. What are they supposed to teach me about me? Because they're in my life, and I'm supposed to learn something from them. And that doesn't mean that that I can't turn that off. I'm doing that with my girlfriend and everyone else. There's definitely more of the days when there may be a bit of a struggle. Or there's also a beautiful moment. Oh, wow. Like, I wonder why I have this person in my life. And we just had such an amazing experience. In some ways, they're teaching me something. So that means I'm learning, which is great. But I'm doing that with parents too. I try to, or if that is in coaching seminars, and you're being challenged in different direction, I think the understanding of asking questions back is very important. If someone asks you, or if someone judges you or tells you what you could have done differently, or they ask me a question, I may ask questions back, because if I understand their viewpoint first, now my responses back to them will be more diligent, or they will be more controlled, or they may be more defined in what they're actually looking for, because what I perceive in their question may not actually be the proper answer right away. Okay, well, let's
Mhm.
dig a little deeper. How come you asked me the question? Like, what is something that is, depending on what the question is, but you just bring questions back to them. And a lot of times they don't even need an answer from me anymore, because now by them receiving other questions from me, they found their own answer. Now, of course, it comes down to how emotionally attached they are and how heated they are, and, how their self worth is attached to these questions. Or are they
Right.
asking questions to educate themselves? And I think that's also a component. Are they emotionally attached to these questions? Should they wait 24 hours and try and ask that same question again?
Yeah.
Or are they actually asking a question to educate themselves? And that is one thought. That's not always easy to stay emotionally detached from questions
Mhm.
on both sides. But I think that's starting point. Is this about me, or is it about them? And how can I help and educate? Or let's hear them out first to completely understand where they're coming from. And if you truly ask proper questions back, they may already find their answer, or you give them more of an answer that they're looking for.
Right. Right, and yeah, I've seen a quote before. It's not the action or insult itself that hurts us, it's whether we choose to believe it, right? So in every situation and every circumstance, we have our own ability to sit there and go, "Okay, it's up to me how I respond or how I take that in," right? And, so the next thing that I kinda wanted to go into was, w when we have those prior experiences with whoever it is, and we kind of hold on to those grudges, or maybe even if it's a first impression, right? Like, oh, well, I don't like that guy because of the one thing that happened. It's kind of, okay, well, maybe you need to get to know them a little bit better and
Mhm.
understand them. But also on the other side, when somebody wrongs us in the past, like, oh, I didn't make that team because so and so was here, or oh, my dad did this, or my mom did this. And kind of, for me, a big thing was being able to give forgiveness. And like, even if I don't, it's not a verbalized interaction between it, it's just something that I'm like, okay, yes, that happened. They're coming it from their perspective. Maybe they weren't in the right place. But at the end of the day, if I keep thinking about that or holding on to that, I'm can't move forward in my life. And that's
Yeah.
something that I've used since becoming sober and learning about all this kind of stuff. And I learned it in treatment. Like, forgiveness is as much for yourself or more than for the other person,
Mhm.
right? Whether
Yeah.
they choose to accept it is up to them. But
Yeah.
for yourself to relieve yourself of that pressure and that weight, it's kind of, it's freeing, and it allows you to move on with things.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you
Yeah.
had any experiences with that, with any of
Yeah. I
your
think
background?
any person that came in my life or any scenario that you lived through, if it was depleting, heavy, wonderful, whatever, loving, caring, I find with when it comes to forgiveness, one of the biggest things that was important to me was to forgive myself first for
Mhm.
thinking certain things about me or for thinking certain or make assumptions about others. Because if I change that in my mind, the viewpoint of myself and others will change too, and it will soften it a little bit. But in order to forgive myself, I need to start loving myself and again, have some self worth that I deserve to forgive myself, that I deserve to forgive others compared to, well, I'm not good enough. So if I'm not good enough, I don't have self-worth. I don't have the strength and energy to forgive myself, but let's forgive others. But did I truly forgive others if I haven't forgiven myself? And I think that's the part that was really big for me was how do I forgive myself through self-worth and love? And if I forgive myself, does that change the perception of the story that I always saw when I compare that to a person or a scenario or this story that I thought happened? Is that truly what happened? Or
Right.
did I feel pity? Did I feel I'm not worth it? And that's why I brought it to another level. Am I the victim here? This is happening to me. And I think that's the part where, me moving to Canada, going through divorce over here, giving up pro hockey. I also felt like in some ways I gave up family, but did I really give up family? I was just trying to find myself. And for me, I had to move to Canada to truly find myself, instead of being in a comfortable environment at home where you have, a soothing feel and love and different feels. No, I had to go the other direction, and that's okay. And again, I'm proud of that I was able to conquer mental health to this point and find self love. And that doesn't mean that it's there every single day. There's definitely moments of, uh, like, am I really loving myself now, or is that a facade? You second guess yourself, but that's okay. That challenge keeps popping in because now you have an opportunity to find another layer of how do I strengthen my self love and my self worth because I am questioning myself. And I find there's no difference within those conversations, as there may be, well, I'm a good hockey player. And then the coach said, well, you need to do this better. You're like, oh, crap, no, I'm not good enough again. But really,
Yeah.
that coach is actually making you better. So let's take the route of, well, let's listen to that and embrace it and work on it because now that person's the person we want to have because I was just challenged. We want
Mhm.
to have that within too. If I
Yeah.
keep finding myself doubting myself in moments, let's celebrate it. So there's an
Yeah.
opportunity of even more growth and more stability if we choose that route. And that choice is definitely a choice. And I find asking ourselves too, what do I want to choose for myself right now to feel better, to feel more loved, to feel more embraced? I'm choosing that question with a word of choice in a positive and wild way compared to being self-doubting, second guessing. Well, why am I here? Why am I living in Canada? That question doesn't help me. How
Hmm.
come I moved to Canada to live here on my own? And what is it teaching me is actually a way more a productive question because I am focusing on moving on and moving forward compared to standing still. And I
Right.
think that's kind of what's definitely working for me is um, being the biggest fan of myself, even on the days when there's struggles, and being soft and gentle with myself on the days when I'm struggling, compared to being hard on myself on the days I'm struggling. And that's something that I had to learn too.
Right. That internal self-talk, right? The way we talk to ourselves is completely different than the way we would talk to other people most of the time. And
Yeah.
I've done this a lot throughout my whole life, but even when I was starting this kind of project and all that kind of stuff, just like I had severe self-doubt and like, could I possibly write anything? Could I possibly record anything? Could anybody want to listen to it? Like, what is the, but then I had to keep telling myself all that external stuff doesn't matter if you're not able to actually do it. Right? Like if you don't start, you're never going to know those things. But at the end of the day, those aren't the important things. It's you want to do this and you think you can do this. So focus on starting and then see where it goes. And like
Mhm.
my whole thing was like, I just started to tell myself, I was like, if one person listens to the episode, good. If
Yeah.
one person finds it helpful, then it's benefited, right? Then it's
Yeah.
good. And like that was kind of, and even once I finished it, and then I wanted to start doing these recordings again,
Mhm.
another level of like, well, who's going to want to talk to me? Where, like, all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, right? So it's a daily struggle with myself is saying,
Yeah.
okay, you're telling yourself those stories again, right? Where
Yeah.
you can't do this or you wouldn't talk to anybody else the way you're talking to yourself. It's
Mhm.
kind of a daily occurrence with
Yeah.
within my
Yeah.
brain.
And the way we communicate to ourselves is based on our own self-worth. So if I don't have that, why would I be speaking well to myself? If I do have it, there
Mhm.
may be a more quiet voice. There's
Right.
always going to be a voice, but I maybe change the volume of that voice or the direction that voice is trying to push us. And that's okay. I think accepting that there will always be a voice that may challenge us is one thing. And then another thing that I heard was intentions. And I find with what you're currently doing, which I think you should be proud of to talk about it on like a weekly basis on say hardships and mental health is so big, especially since the pandemic has really
Yeah.
taken on another layer. But find the intentions of wanting to put something out there that would be the main component for me. I do this because I mean well and I'd like to help others. Now it's
Mhm.
their choice to look at these things and take it. I don't see anything different with that than the jobs that I do. My intentions are that I love what I do and I want to pass it on. And then people have a choice to embrace it and take it or leave it. And that's okay because everyone's on their own life path. And maybe some people will need and listen to your podcast information a year from now,
Yeah.
because then they're ready for it and then they may need it, but we can't control that. And that's
Mhm.
kind of where that emotional detachment is really important. as of, we don't all drive the same type of vehicle. We all drive different vehicles, but then we may rotate and switch because we feel
Mhm.
like we're ready for something else, or we need something else based on financial needs, or what we find is worth spending money on, and what we currently, I don't have a family anymore. I don't need a big vehicle. I could just have a smaller one, or I now go to a big vehicle, and that's just fine. I think the intent, that's kind of the important part, is sticking with change. Change is important. Change is needed. Intentions are so important. Um, if I have the proper intentions that are not for an outcome, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart, I truly find things will fall in place on its own on the other side. And then we get to enjoy and watch what happens on the other side,
Right.
um, when it does happen. But if I'm doing something just to do it because I want to get an outcome, I don't think that's sincere, and people
Yeah.
will feel that. And that's kind of what I'm trying to um, pass on a daily
Right.
basis. Like, I'm sincere, I mean it. And if you don't want to embrace it, that's okay. It's your
Right.
choice. And then it's kind of like me asking you a question. I need to be ready that you may say that you don't like it, or yet you do like it,
Mhm.
or yes or no. I can't,
Yeah.
expect for everything to be like that someone else does. And that's coming based on be feeling more grounded, feeling more self-worth,
Mhm.
because I'm not attaching my worth to how many viewers I have, how many likes I have, and so on. Of course,
Right.
that's sad enough these days, that TikTok and Instagram and all
Yeah.
that. But yeah, that's the way the world turns these days.
And yeah. And, like, from my perspective is you've done a great job of creating that circle, uh, your own circle of you and having that self-love. And then I saw, like, a description the other day where it was like a circle, and then there was another one, and then there was a bigger one, and it's kind of like how you can impact the world, but how you need to start. And, like, the first circle is you. Then the next circle is the people who you're in direct contact with, like your friends, your family. Then there's a bigger circle where it's like your community, and then so on, right? And I just loved it because, like, if the circle of you isn't complete, you can't just skip over into those
Yeah.
next phases, right? And I find I've kinda noticed, I think a big thing is that a lot of people have an incomplete circle of you, and they kinda distract themselves by jumping
Hmm.
into all of these issues that are going on, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, it's easier to hop on board with something completely out of your control and make yourself think that you make yourself feel good instead of actually working on your own stuff, right? And, like, that's something that I've kind of looked at and have worked on too, is, like, I've done a lot of self-healing and a lot of thoughts, and, like, I still have, right, those doubts and stuff, but I have a good grasp of who I am, and that was another thing that made me want to start to do this kind of stuff, is
Yeah.
I can start to reach people out there. And turns out the first people that are listening are mainly my family and friends, right? So it's going to
Hmm.
that, and then eventually if other people start coming in, then that's great, but
Hmm.
I'm not gonna kinda not be authentic with myself and start just I don't wanna start just completely overloading Instagram and all this kinda
Yeah.
stuff, and all, like, I've kinda come with the, um, idea of undersell and overdeliver is kind of what I've,
Hmm.
like, I'm just gonna try to build something really good right
Hmm.
now, like talking to you, talking to people that I know, and then from there, we can move on, and that's kind of the outcome that I've looked created for myself is
Yeah.
starting small. Like, I feel like it's people don't start small, and everything's gotta be, "I have a big announcement," or I
Hmm.
have this, I have that, this is coming out, like, get ready for it. And it's just kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
where I'm going with this, but it's
No,
kind
that's
of
fine.
like,
But
yeah,
what I'm kind of here with that is um, how we choose words, and that comes back to how we talk to ourselves. If it's
Yeah.
small or big,
Yeah.
it, this in some ways is a huge thing for you because you got to be vulnerable every
Yeah.
time you start the mic. So is it really a small environment? I don't think it is.
Right.
For small and big, that's for everyone else to choose, because for me it
Mhm.
is pretty big. For you, find it maybe small, but the definition of these things, does it truly matter if the intentions are in the right place, if I'm doing this for the right reasons? And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, there's healing within this too. Every
Mhm.
time I talk to anyone about health, mental health, that doesn't mean I want to put my ideas on them. I'm sharing what I'm experiencing so I can keep learning from that and grow with it. And then
Mhm.
the perception of how someone really takes it, I can't control that anyway. And some may connect to it and others don't. And that is okay. And that's kind of what, when you and I are talking, we're both learning and healing and growing out of
Mhm.
this. And it's a comfortable environment, and it's a supporting environment. And I think that's the part where the judgmental part is too large these days, where everyone seems to know things better than others.
Right.
But this isn't a competition in between you and I. It's
Mhm.
you're sharing your story. I'm sharing my story. We're talking about our ideas and thoughts. And with that, we have a spiral of conversation compared to I would be shutting you down right now for what you said, and then you shut me
Mhm.
down. Well, we're not spiraling anymore. We're not healing and helping each other. And I find that's where this is a nice, comfortable environment that I miss having conversations with people about, um, meaningful things. And whatever that is for me may be different for someone else. But a lot of things are through text, a lot of things are being written on social media, but the talking environment is kind of getting lost. And I love that. I also find that I'm an old soul that way, because for me, I learned by listening to what I say as well as what others are saying. That's a learning environment by listening. And I find writing isn't the same impact for me to write things from others. I don't hear the tone. I don't see their face. I don't
Yeah.
see how they mean that it's written, but what are
Mhm.
they going through and what is heavy on their mind? And maybe they're frustrated or they hate themselves, but they now got to bring us someone else down to feel better about themselves. And all those things are okay as long as we still keep looking for growing within. And I do wish some of these things would be more taught in high school and when you're being educated through life. Um, but yeah, it's also okay to live them in relationships and professionalism or whatever that may be. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm hearing there. So I think this is pretty big for you to put yourself out there, and you may call it small. I think being vulnerable is pretty big, and not a lot of people are vulnerable about their own needs and who they truly are. And that's why there's so many
Yeah.
mental health issues that turn into suicidal thoughts or being suicidal, or you know, uh, eating disorders, or hurting others, or whatever that may be. There's so many different directions, and
Mhm.
that's definitely not healthy these days.
Right. Um, yeah. Like, the potential right now, it's just you and I talking,
Mhm.
right? Like, we're sitting here exactly what you said. We're sharing our stories and we're learning from each other. And I think,
Yeah,
yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm starting to do this too, is because I want to hear from people that I think have great perspectives. And the teachings that I receive can also be put out there to whomever listens to it, wherever, whenever that is. Um,
yeah,
are you comfortable sharing a little bit more with kind of your experiences with depression, anxiety, and kind of how you came out of it or how you live with it or whatever
yeah,
you.
definitely. So with me moving to Canada, I with the scenarios I had here, I think I had to go through these to actually realize that there's anxiety and depression, and I've had that my whole life. But growing up, you didn't look at it that way. You looked at it as being a sad day or maybe being moody and a little snappy because you have fear. You're living through fear. And I actually had to go through an experience when I went through Amsterdam. And I don't do any drugs or anything like that. But at the time, this is, I don't know, 10, 11 years ago, at the time, I was dating someone and the idea was, let's go to a coffee shop in Amsterdam. And we ended up having space cake or brownie or whatever it is. And I don't do
Yeah.
well and I never experienced it. Right. So
Mhm.
for me, I ate the whole piece at one. You're supposed to nibble
Yeah.
at it to see
Yeah.
how that impacts and affects you. I inhaled the whole thing like I do with anything food. I inhale it. So the waitress came over and said, like, well, have you had this before? You're not supposed to eat it at one thing. And I'm like, oh my God, I wish I would have
Uh-oh.
known. So I had I thought I'm dying in Amsterdam. I thought my life was over. It was the worst night of my life when it comes to
Mhm.
aftermath and after effects of, doing a certain drug. I mean, this was a coffee shop. It was legal. So for me, it's
Yeah.
like, I guess it can't be so bad, but you're not used to
Mhm.
that. Either way, that is actually what really, really magnified my anxiety and depression
Really?
that I've always had through this incident. And then after that, living in Calgary and going through relationships that may have not worked and so on, that's when I really felt the anxiety and depression with suicidal thoughts, not wanting to live anymore, not wanting to wake up the next day. Can I just fall asleep? You had less sleep. You would sometimes just sleep 2 hours a night. How are you going to function the next day?
Mhm.
With me being in some ways alone over here when it comes to income. At the time I was single. I had to keep going for myself, but I was in an automatic tunnel view. I just do this so I can eat tomorrow and survive and pay my bills. There was no
Mhm.
future dreams. There was no future goals. There was no excitement for anything, seeing friends, seeing nothing.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate that the job that I have isn't really a job. It's a hobby I'm being paid for. So it made that component much easier to earn money because it came natural to me. I was also very fortunate to talk to my parents daily, that probably felt and saw like what's going on here. Um, do we need to be worried and friends and stuff like that? But yeah, I guess it was so dark and the not sleeping what I find was the biggest component of having these voices in your head, telling you all these things that you should be doing because it's not worth it anymore because you're just not functioning proper. I'm gladly enough I didn't stop eating. I was still eating. And another thing that may be different from you, there was some days when I was like, well, why don't I just have a glass of rum and coke right now? And then I would
Mhm.
start having it, and then I'm like, no, I don't want to go down that direction. So
Yeah.
yeah, you just pour it out and be like, screw that, I'm not going there. That's not who I am. And that's not going to help me to be drunk
Yeah.
tonight to then fall asleep. Which then, of course, with hallucinations and stuff like that, it was just so bad. Like, I was scared to be on trains. I was suffocated on trains, leaving downtown, going to different places. I was sometimes having panic attacks in cars. I would be driving myself to the triage in the middle of the night, going through all the red lights because I thought I'm going to die as I was on the phone with 911. Um,
Mhm.
I would just park the car in front of the hospital, leave the hazard lights on, have it running, run in there and be like, guys, I'm dying. Can someone help me? And they're like, please get in line. And I'm
Mm.
like, how is that? As much as they may see this on a daily basis, for me, I think I'm dying. And I find
Mhm.
if the healthcare system would have different layers of support, me breaking my leg is a different support than me having a broken brain, let's say,
Mhm.
and I need emotional and mental health. That's kind of the experience that I lived. And yeah, like I said, there was days where I'm like, let's just be done here because what's the point? But yeah, then you just keep kind of going with, no, I'm here. I chose this path for myself for a reason. I'm supposed to learn something out of it. And I don't know, that's probably what got me over the hump of, okay, I'm here to learn. Let's focus on what I'm supposed to learn. How do I love myself? What's important to me in my life? What have I achieved? Who I've become? What have I overcome? And now you're going
Mhm.
down that gratitude route, which was so important for me. And to keep going. So yeah, I think there's so many layers of not living in the future, not living in the past. If I live in the future, I may get anxiety. If I live in the past, I may get depressed. But how do I
Yes.
learn to live in the moment? And there was so many learning experiences within that were truly key. But I find, yeah, close people or friends and family were definitely there, and you could sense it, as well as especially that I ended up quitting, which wasn't easy, actually kept me alive too, because of how natural it came to me and uh, how it was like a peaceful place. Yeah, I was living in the moment every time. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of the route that wasn't easy, but it was worth it if I look at it
Yeah.
from now on. So yeah,
So, yeah, isolation, but then also when you're out, like you said, in the trains or confined spaces, you can't really handle that stuff. But also when you try to seek help, it's kind of like you get pushed aside. And I experienced that too the one time when I had a depressive episode and I was having those suicidal ideations as well. I went I went to the hospital as well, and you sit there, and I sat there for hours and hours, and then you get moved into another room and you sit there for an
yeah,
hour and an hour,
yeah,
and then it's someone comes in and, like, at this point in my life, I was still in school. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't get myself to start any sort
yeah,
of work or do anything and all this kind of stuff. And I remember the advice was just, "Well, have you tried just starting to do a little bit and
yeah,
then see what happens?" And I just remember being like, "Okay, this isn't gonna help me." And, like, it's nothing against that person, or I know it's a system and a lot of
yeah,
people need help and all that kind of stuff, but it's
yeah,
trying to find other avenues that can lend you that help, whether it's listening to
yeah,
someone who's been through it or a professional. And all that stuff that you dealt with, I'm sure you're able to take into that personal or life coaching that you're doing now.
yeah.
So is that something that you go off, or how does what is kind of like your premise going into that life coaching and helping other people? Is that something, did it drive you into that, or how did that come about?
Well, um, I find I find initially when I started, doing personal coaching, business coaching, but that's what it's really called. But
Yeah.
I find anything goes in direction of life. If I'm a
Yeah.
counselor in high school or elementary school, or if I'm a counselor in a business downtown, it always impacts life. It keeps coming back to the person, their identity, who they think they are, their beliefs, and their emotional controls, and so on. But throughout the whole Um, I don't know, 20 years now, I'm in Canada. I've seen counselors, I've talked to psychologists, saw the psychiatrist for the medication that I was on for
Mhm.
depression and anxiety. And I was always just so curious about that deeper layer of, wow, like there's so much we could be viewing differently, controlling differently, or embracing differently if we just understand mental health better. And
Mhm.
that was, it was just a deeper level of understanding myself, but also starting to understand others. And I don't know. I think if we understand ourselves better, we can treat other people better. If we understand what their needs are and their love languages, we can help them and understand them better. But with
Mhm.
the life coaching aspect, um, I- I'm just curious to hear other people's perspectives, what they're going through, what they're living, and I'm almost looking at myself as a sounding board or a mirror or a guide. I'm not going in from the perspective, I'm here to help you today. Because if they don't want to
Yeah.
help themselves, there's nothing I can do. And I
Right.
find if that's a sport, if that's the mental health, if that's me learning to wanting to play guitar, I need to want that for myself.
Mhm.
And there actually is in some ways too, when it comes to personal coaching, if the person doesn't want to help themselves, that's one of the 3 or 4 pillars that are important within personal coaching. If that's not there, the coaching usually isn't going to continue because there won't be growth within it.
Mhm.
I also find within personal coaching, a lot of people, they just want to be heard. There's nothing
Yeah.
that they want me to fix. They just want to be a sounding board. I just want to like almost like throw it up how I feel to hear what I'm thinking. Now I hear it.
Mhm.
Oh, now I feel better because I can redirect myself. Everyone has a different experience with it, and I'm not. I'm not saying because I'm a personal coach that I've figured everything out. And as much as a psychologist and a,
Mm.
counselor hasn't figured everything out, every person in life still lives their stuff every single day. And that's okay. We're just maybe taught how to help people when it comes to how to be guided or how to listen to people and pick certain things. But that doesn't mean we have it all figured out. And that was one at the beginning when I started personal coaching. Some people kind of, you could hear through the grapevine a little bit. Well, but isn't he still trying to figure it out? Sure. I'll always be
Yeah.
honest about it. Every day is a new
Exactly.
day to figure things out and learn. That doesn't mean I'm a personal coach because I'm perfect and I got it all in place. I want to just be another person for someone else, for another Sven that is
Yeah.
struggling, right? And if I can be that person, then so be it. If that person chooses me, and I also find within mental health, um, too many people are sticking with one person. You need to find the right person that works for you, where you're actually feeling growth, where you walk
Yeah.
away with, okay, I was heard, I wasn't judged. And when you mentioned the whole downtown triage place, and then you go through all these different rooms, and there sits the
Yeah.
person there. In some ways, oh, you're number 12 today. You're number
Yeah.
72 today that they're talking to. That's why I'm happy that they implemented that new helpline. I think
Yeah.
it's 811 or whatever it is, for
988?
people to call. 988.
988.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
That's
think
the
so.
one.
Yeah.
I love that because I did call. There was another different number that I used to
Yeah.
call. And that did help at times
Mhm.
when I was struggling because I was also embarrassed
Mhm.
to mention to people that I'm depressed, that that I have anxiety, that that I have all these funky thoughts in my head because I was worried about what they're going to think of me and that they're
Mhm.
going to detach themselves from me and that I'm really then all alone. And I was scared to do that. But at the end of the day, I think, like you mentioned, you start with a smaller pool of people that actually do care. And it's not the 2,000 people that I have as friends
Mhm.
on Instagram. It may
Yeah.
be 2 or 3 people that truly listen and that give you that, um, I don't know, taking that ownership. Okay, now I want to go to that next layer. And that maybe that next layer is kind of like the circle you talked about earlier there. And that
Yeah.
may be a professional. And that first professional may not be the right person. Let's check into another professional. I remember going to a counselor that kept looking at her watch. And then she's like, well, I guess it's over. And I was deep in my talk. I was struggling. So now I left on a negative note.
Yeah.
I get it that they have a timeline, but they're also in a guiding position of they can guide a conversation too, so that it doesn't peak in the 55th minute of an hour,
Yeah.
but it may
Right.
peak in the 35th minute or whatever that is, or it may be pushed into the next conversation. And that's kind of where I find mental health has come a long way,
Mhm.
because we do find it's needed, and that's beautiful. And I hope it continues going that way. And I hope that more men speak up about their needs.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing that's very interesting is my girlfriend is Venezuelan, and I mentioned that to you last week. She asked me
Yeah.
how come suicide and depression and mental health is so big in North America as well as Europe. In Venezuela, it's not talked about. So we actually looked at the stats worldwide, and Venezuela's way down the bottom there when it comes to mental health being a negative.
Mhm.
They're living different, and they actually have way more struggles
Yeah.
when it comes to the
Right.
government and whatever is going on with food situation and having
Yeah.
money, depending on which end you're on. But yeah, that's kind of, it's interesting. And you know what? Maybe 2 years from now, we're going to look at this video and be like, wow, look how far I've come since
Yeah.
that
Right.
podcast. And that's exciting. I think that's exciting, that how much growth is possible if we choose to look at it that way.
Right. Yeah. I think I think the big thing that I took there was every you kinda need to make sure that you find something that works for you, and like we've kinda talked about a little bit throughout this whole thing is it doesn't look the same for everybody, and but also where you said, "Well, he's not perfect. How can he help other people?"
Mhm.
And I find if somebody tells you they're perfect and has all the answers for you, run
Mhm.
the other way. Like,
Yeah.
that is they're probably gonna sell you something that you don't need to buy, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, I've found myself trapped in that before, like, I almost got into this course where it was, like, it bells and whistles and all this kind of stuff, and then I realized I
Yeah.
was like, "No, no, no, hold on a minute."
Yeah.
Um, and but that's also something that I've struggled with too was I know I'm not perfect. I have all these
Yeah.
struggles. I have these habits and
Mhm.
there's times when it's hard for me to get to the gym and it's hard for me
Yeah.
to eat right and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's how can I sit here and go to try to help people get
Yeah.
them to do it if I can't do it myself? But it's
Yeah.
like where I have come from to where I am now
Yeah.
is a miles of
Yeah.
difference. The person I used to be to where I am now, and it's just like you say, like, we'll look back at this podcast in 2 years and who knows where we're gonna
Mhm.
be, right? But
Yeah.
that's what I've started to recognize in myself. It's like, dude, remember when you were drinking almost every day and you
Mhm.
had no drive or ambition, you thought you couldn't do anything, like all this stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
look at you now, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's something that we don't appreciate in ourselves
Mhm.
is those small growths, right? It's all
Yeah.
the external stuff and that kind.
Yeah.
Um, is
Yeah. I
there
find, sorry, but I just thought
yeah,
of two
go for it.
things when you were talking is, um, when those other people were saying, well, how can you be, a personal coach? You need
Yeah,
to figure out your own stuff. But, but sometimes we do listen to what they're not saying, right? And what's going on with them to say that.
yeah.
And maybe it is about, maybe they're in some ways also jealous that they don't have the strength to try and go into these fields, or
Mhm.
that they're maybe having a lack of certain things, whatever that may be. It isn't about me, what that person is saying.
Right.
I can make it about myself, but
Yeah,
I'm not choosing to, because I don't have any bad intentions with me wanting to be a personal coach or a skills coach or a high
yeah.
performance coach on the ice, whatever that may be. I don't have bad intentions. And if someone judges that, it really isn't about me. But that took me a long time to deal with that
Mhm.
because of being labeled. And then being labeled is another component. Um, you know, oh, you start talking, well, he must be from Germany. And then what do we know about Germany? Now we go into labeling them with, oh, what happened with the
Yeah.
war? But, like, how come we're doing that? And I find, we as humans are, for some reason, we always need to label something that's where they're from, that's who they are. But when we don't even know who we are ourselves and we're trying to experience that, how can others label us in the first place? Compared
Right.
to, let's focus on, well, what is the person's positive intentions? Like, what are they
Mhm.
trying to do with that? Maybe they're trying to help others because they struggle. And if we look at, um, I always mix up Robbie Williams and Robin Williams. One was a singer and was an
Yeah.
actor.
Yeah.
He killed himself, the actor, but
Yeah.
he was always playing all these roles to make other people happy because
Right.
he didn't want others to feel what he's feeling in his moments being alone at home.
Mhm.
Um, so when you hear those scenarios, I'm like, let's just focus on what we can do within ourselves. Everyone walks through their life every day trying to be the best version of themselves, and it doesn't always work out.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning and says, I'm really going to do this today and hurt that person, or I'm really going
Right.
to. I don't think anyone intentionally does that. It is the spirit of the moment that things happen. And that's kind of what I heard from when you were just talking there is, that we're using strong words of perfect and non-perfect and
Yeah.
positive and negative. And I don't know if we're taught through adulthood from our parents how to communicate within. And we may just pick up whatever our parents do. And then we think that is our normal until we realize we get to create our own normal. How do I want to communicate within my head
Mhm.
with myself? And maybe the way that our parents tried to do it is the best they did. But I don't
Yeah.
think a parent gets a manual at birth and here, this is how you're going to treat this kid. They're going to do the best they can. And I think that was a huge one for me too, when it comes to my childhood, to accept that what people did was their very best and now have an opportunity to add other components to it that may benefit me differently. And that's a healthy mindset, I find.
Right. That incorporates so much of what we've talked about, right? Being able to
Mhm.
control how you respond to others and that
Yeah.
understanding that they've lived their own life and
Mhm.
they have the tools that they were provided with, and some people are able to recognize those tools and change them, or some people just show up with what they were given and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So we are coming up on about an hour and 20 minutes.
Mhm.
We're going to try and keep this under an hour and a half for you. Is
Right.
there kind of a last message or anything you would like to end off
Ugh.
with? I know it's kind of a on the spot question, but
Um, when you were just talking, I think what came up for me was I'm not good enough. Uh, when someone judges you, well, I'm not good enough, and I have those. They happen here and there, definitely, where you feel like someone said something, and is it really about what they said, or is it about how I'm emotionally attached to it? And I feel like I'm
mhm,
not good enough. And other times it may not impact me because I am good enough. So that those words aren't really. I'm not choosing to get those emotions engaged and then feel and think what is coming. That's kind of what I heard in the last one. Um, I don't know. I don't know if there really is anything that I would want to say besides being patient and kind with yourself as a human, and that everything does happen for a reason, as cliche as that sounds.
yeah,
Uh, things do happen for a reason. And if we look at the reason of what am I supposed to learn out of this, because I am in this environment for a reason, and how does this benefit me? How does this environment benefit me, or how does it slingshot me into, my next level
yeah,
of growth? I think focusing on that is huge because now I'm in a movement environment compared to in a stagnant environment. That's probably the biggest thing for me that I learned
right,
through all this. We get too stuck in and not moving on and not appreciating our own accomplishments, like you were sharing. Like, look where you were 5 years ago and look where you're now. And being able to talk about this isn't easy every day. Like earlier, you get a bit emotional because you relive the feel that was so heavy, but you're able to speak about it. And that is, I
Hmm.
think that is growth on its own. And another thing that I keep hearing is comparison. There's so much comparison out there. If that is you and I comparing ourselves as hockey players, for example, or
Hmm.
how was our childhood? How was yours? How was mine? But what I'm hearing is I can't even compare myself to myself 5 years ago, 3 weeks ago. So
Right.
I can't compare myself to the depressed kid that didn't want to be there anymore to now. Why am I comparing myself to others? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And I think the comparison should have a positive twist to it. Look how far I've come in
Yes.
comparison to who I was and where I'm now. That is more at flow and moving forward than the comparison of, oh, well, why did they buy that car? Or why, oh, look at him. Here we go again. He's going to show us what he got. But why wouldn't I look at it? What is he teaching me right now? Because I'm a little fragile. I'm a little frazzled. I'm a little, what is he teaching me? And I find that that's a healthy way. I know I'm kind of going in different directions with what we kind of wanted to finish with, but that's kind of an explosion of thoughts. You choose whatever you want to end up,
Yeah.
doing with that.
So, so try not to compare. Look how far I've come, and remember that I am good enough, or you are good enough,
Yeah.
is a great
Yeah.
message. Okay.
Yeah. That's definitely in the right direction for sure. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, let's end it at that. Once again, thank you
Mhm.
so much for doing this and being vulnerable and sharing and
Yeah.
really opening yourself up to us. And I know I definitely enjoyed it and I love talking to you all the time. So thank you for coming.
Yeah. Thanks for being open enough to have me out and listen to my story. And that story may change again depending on where we move on. But for now, that's the story that I have. And thanks for taking the time to have me out. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you guys for listening.